everyone. As Herschel said, my name is Jason. I'm one of the newer residents at the Monastic Academy. And tonight I'm going to be telling a bit of my story of how I came to this training of mindfulness and service, and how I came to be a resident at the Monastic Academy. The story begins before I was born, actually. My parents, when they got married, they decided instead of one or the other just taking the other one's last name, that they would choose a new family name that they would both hyphenate onto their last names and give to their kids. At the time, my mom was reading Joanna Macy's book, World is Lover, World is Self, and she came across the term Shramadana, which means a gift of labor, giving your labor as a gift to someone without any expectation of getting something in return. And she really resonated with this term and thought it was powerful and thought it might be a nice name. Upon thinking about it further, she thought it might be a little strange to give a bunch of white kids the last name Shramadana. If, say, like, I'm in class taking attendance and, like, Jason Shramadana, like, see me, it might be a little weird. So she shortened it to just Dana, which is the Sanskrit word for generosity. Although she got the pronunciation slightly wrong. And so we've lived with the name Dana, with a little emphasis on the end. But that's sort of the beginning of, you could probably say, the story of me coming to this practice. Sort of a very early seed planted. And my parents were also inspirations for me as people who were really giving themselves to serving other people. My mother works in the mental health field. My dad is a retired high school US history teacher and is also very politically involved. Tomorrow he will be getting arrested with the Extinction Rebellion protests in New York City. And so another seed planted fairly early on of appreciating the value that comes from doing work that is in service to other people. Growing up, I struggled a lot with my mental health. When I was young, about elementary school age, I was very angry. When I was a middle schooler, I struggled a lot with anxiety and depression, and then into high school, loneliness was really prominent for me. And so the prospect of going off and living on my own when I would graduate high school and go to college was really scary for me. I felt very poorly about myself and very afraid of other people in the world, and so I really didn't know how that was going to go. But then the winter of my senior year of high school, I underwent a pretty significant shift in outlook or personality shift. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but something happened. And I can remember a couple of things that really contributed to this. The first one is I watched the documentary called I Am. It's a documentary done by the director Tom Shadyac, who actually doesn't typically do this kind of work. He's got his fame through doing a lot of work with Jim Carrey and movies like Bruce Almighty and Ace Ventura. But then he got in a near-death biking accident, and this really shook things up for him, and he started to do some soul-searching in the way that a famous Hollywood director does by making a documentary. And so he made this documentary, I Am, seeking to answer the questions of what's wrong with our world and what can we do about it. And so he interviewed historians, intellectuals, scientists, and spiritual teachers. And through watching this movie and hearing these people talk about what's wrong with the world and also ways to respond to it, I started to get a sense of what I could do with my life, because this is also a time in my life where this question was very prominent. You know, about to graduate high school, people are asking me, what are you going to study in college? What are you going to do for a career? And so, again, watching this film was like, oh, it seems like there's a lot to be done in responding to the crises that are playing out in our world today. And I didn't need to look further than my own life to see that there was a lot of suffering in the world, but also growing up, there were a lot of social and political issues that were troubling to me. I remember at that time, this is around the time that Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson, and also a lot was happening in Gaza with people being killed. So this was something that gave me a sense of direction and a sense of some excitement for what might come next. The second thing that I remember contributing to this shift was reading the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Just by a show of hands, who's come across this book? Yeah, almost all the room. It's probably one of the biggest spiritual gateway drugs out there, I've found, from talking with people. And it was recommended to me by my therapist, who was telling me the author Eckhart Tolle's story, and it was really intriguing to me. And so I went out, got the book, finished it in probably 2 days. As soon as I picked it up and read the preface, where he goes into his story again, and then into the rest of the book, I remember feeling like that book spoke so directly to my experience and how I was suffering in a way that I didn't, just hadn't come across before. I remember pretty vividly one point I was sitting on my bed reading the book. I don't remember exactly what I was reading, but I read a line and then my forehead relaxed. And I was like, oh, how long has my forehead been tense? not like it had been like a few hours or something, but it had been like months or like years. Like I didn't know like my forehead was tense or could feel relaxed like it did. So reading that book and a couple books by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist author and teacher that I picked up after reading that, it gave me a way of making sense out of how I was struggling, something to do about it, and a sense of hope that something could be done about it, that I was a good person, that I could be happy. And in offering this new way of relating to my experience for the first time that maybe I can remember, the first time in a long time then, anyway, I had a sense of hope and real determination to change how I was relating to my experience and my life. And this new way of relating to things, this practice of mindfulness was quickly put to the test by my life. I was reading The Power of Now probably, say, like February or March of 2015. And then come April, shit like really hit the fan for my family. One of my family members was having a mental health crisis. My sister was on crutches recovering from a knee surgery. My stepfather fainted and went to the hospital after being on a walk with my mom and found out that he had heart troubles and had a heart monitor, and so couldn't drive and do things like this. My dad had emergency brain surgery. He fell and hit his head and then just like didn't end up getting an MRI or whatever. Then all of a sudden, one day was in the hospital and had to have emergency craniotomy. And then to sort of like top the whole bizarre series of events off, my neighbor was murdered. And like I don't like live in an area where like people getting murdered is a common thing. It's like upper middle class suburbs in New York. And yeah, so that was just like the rug of reality, things that I could rely on had pretty quickly been pulled out from under me, and a lot of responsibility for supporting my family was put on me in a pretty short period of time. And the way that I was able to show up for my family and respond to what was happening would have been a lot different had I not started practicing mindfulness and had the perspective that I have a choice in how I relate to my experience. And I had the insight, the direct experience into how finding some peace for myself, finding a way to be happy and hopeful in my own life has an impact on the people that I'm close to. So that was, again, at the end of high school. After that, I went off to college, and I had, at this point, established somewhat of a meditation practice through the books that I was reading, but was looking for a sense of support through community, looking for other people to practice with, looking for someone to practice under, someone who could teach me meditation. And it was my sophomore year at UVM when Ben Barnett and Lindsay Foreman came to UVM. Ben was coming back for his senior year after studying for 2 years at the Monastic Academy. And Lindsay, who's one of the co-founders of the Center for Mindful Learning, the nonprofit which the Monastic Academy is part of, was hired to be the coordinator of the new UVM mindfulness program. And they were probably the first two people I can really think of that I knew in person who were like actual, like real, like spiritual practitioners, like people who like I knew did these practices, and I could see it in the way they lived their lives and the way that they were in the world. And so through them, I had community through the mindfulness program that they formed. I found that sense of community and support that I was looking for. Yeah, and so that, what I was getting from the mindfulness program was really bringing my practice into my life more. It was giving me an opportunity to have relationships that support my practice, and relationships as an opportunity to show up in a way that is authentic. And so the first thing that I did with the mindfulness program is this 8-week mindful living series, which I learned some techniques from Shinzen Young's unified mindfulness system, and Then after that was completed, there is a 8-week mindfulness facilitator training, where you can actually learn to teach these practices. And for me at the beginning, I wasn't sure how interested I was in actually like being a mindfulness facilitator, but I wanted to be sort of like still with my friends, part of the mindfulness club. And so I went along and did it, and found that that training both really helped me with my own practice, understanding the like ins and outs of specific mindfulness techniques, but then also showed me how much joy and fulfillment can come from sharing these practices with other people. So they had both helped me deepen my own sense of peace and fulfillment in my own life, and then given me an opportunity to go out and share it with other people. And then for the past couple years of the 2 last years of my time at UVM, I was regularly leading mindfulness groups with students, staff, and faculty, clubs, organizations. I had a weekly mindfulness drop-in group at the wellness center at the school called Mindfulness and Muffins, where we would do some mindfulness practices, and then at the end of the class, everyone could help themselves to some muffins I made in my apartment the night before. And so I was discovering really some of the most like purest sense of joy or fulfillment I got was from times where I felt like I was really able to offer people something helpful in those mindfulness groups. Yeah, and so that brings me up through college, and towards the end of my time at UVM, I was coming to the similar questions that I was faced with leaving high school, of what do I do next, what do I want to do, what's the best thing for me to do. And through Ben and Lindsay, I mentioned Ben was a resident at the Monastic Academy, and Lindsay, one of the co-founders. I had made some connections with the community here. I had started coming to Sunday sits fairly regularly. I'd gone up to the Monastic Academy in Lowell for a few retreats, a couple of week-long retreats that Shinzen Young had led, a day-long one that I wrote up with Margaret and friend Alex. And this was another place where I was finding a sense of real, authentic community. I remember a few times over the past couple of years of just like leaving the Sunday sits with a real sense of nourishment, of I sort of had something that I wasn't getting in a lot of the other areas of my life. And that thing, I think, was just showing up and meeting people who were like really just there, really like with me, like in that moment, being themselves. And so I was making friends with the residents that were here. Peter Park, our executive director and assistant teacher at the Monastic Academy, would lead, has led a few public interpersonal meditation circling groups here in Burlington. Going to those really helped me bring my practice into relationships and deepen my connections that way. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm like sort of trailing off from my talk. I'm just gonna sit for a few seconds and see if I can reconnect. So I was faced with the decision of what's next after college. And although I knew about the Monastic Academy and it seems like just a really natural fit for me, there was still a lot of thoughts coming to me, just doubts, sort of like, oh, well, like, shouldn't I just like get a job or like apply to graduate school or something? Like, everyone else seems to do those things. Like, what's like, wouldn't I be missing out on something going to a monastery? And so I was sort of like going back and forth in my head, like, would I go, would I not go, for a little while. And then the decision to go for an apprenticeship just for the summer, but the decision became clear to me after last Thanksgiving. My mom and my sister and I went to spend the holidays with our extended family out in Missouri. And my cousins out there, who I hadn't seen in several years, are a few years older than me, and so a bit further down the like sort of typical regular life path than I am. A couple of them have kids and are doing all the things that people who don't go to monasteries do. And after spending a week with them, I got a sort of a fresh reminder, or saw really clearly that if I was going to live a pretty regular life, but be showing up for people in a way that felt good, and in a way that felt right, that I could probably use some training first. And so the decision just became clear to me. Okay, I'm gonna go for the summer to Maple and do an apprenticeship there to get some more intensive training. And so in June I came as an apprentice, and it was about a month and a half in that I made the decision to become a resident. So apprentices are typically there for 2 to 3 months, and residency is at least 1 year commitment. And I'd gone in knowing there was a pretty good chance that I would want to be a resident, but wasn't 100% sure. And then being at Maple, there were a few things that helped drawing a blank again. I was having some of the most significant experiences of my life that I'd had so far through the structure and the practices we were doing there. There was a lot of support to really go deep in your meditation practice. We had a emotional processing retreat the first month that I was there, where I had maybe the most significant emotional experience I've had before, in front of the whole group on camera as part of a demonstration. And another moment I remember is I was sitting at City Market with John, a former resident who I'm sure many of you remember. And I was just telling him how different it felt walking around Burlington, where I'd lived for 4 years, going to school since I'd been at Maple. And the real difference is that I didn't feel so lonely. Even though as I was walking around Burlington just by myself, I was alone in the crowd, I didn't have this same sense of loneliness. So that's something that Maple is really offering me that I think I was really looking for. And so I was pretty clear that I wanted to be a resident. I remember I was telling Daniel, who's the director of the apprenticeship program, that I was about like 90% sure, but I wasn't quite 100% sure, but I was like, okay, like, you know, I'll do it. I don't want to put this off too long and then the place fills up and then I'm like not able to do it. So I applied to be a resident, and before I became a resident, I went home. My dad came up to the monastery and brought me back, and it was, I remember this week and a couple other times where I would leave Maple, where it, the impact it was having on me became clear. I mentioned talking with John at City Market about walking in Burlington, but then also when my dad came, we spent the night, we left the next morning, and our first stop was at McDonald's to get some food. And I felt just in the way that I was relating to the cashier and the egg McGriddle that I had ordered. There was just a real sense of fulfillment and I don't know if gratitude is the right word, or just sort of like okayness with like what was happening, and sort of like wonder, just like what is like this in front of me. It's like got eggs, but it's like on pancakes. So it like things that before like I just would have felt differently towards when I sort of step out of the container and see is like, oh okay, yeah, something is developing internally. And so that, I think that trip home helped me get closer to 100% certainty that this is the right decision for me to be a resident at Maple. And so that brings me just about up to the present. I've been here since June, so that's 4 months or so. And it's, as I was reflecting on what I was gonna give this talk on, and like going over my story, I was hoping to see if I could find a sense, like a meaning or something that would like tie it all together, or some nice way of framing it. And something that, a pattern that I noticed that stood out to me was there is a relationship between myself finding a sense of peace and then sharing it with other people. First through reading The Power of Now and books by Thich Nhat Hanh, I was able to find a greater sense of peace with myself, with my own mind. And then pretty quickly afterwards was tasked with responding to my family being in a state of crisis and showing up with support and my own peacefulness impacting them. Then I went to UVM, and Ben and Lindsay were kind enough to share some of the peace that they had found for themselves from training here with me. And then showed me how to share that with other people through teaching mindfulness. And now I am at Maple, where very intensively practicing to find a sense of deeper peace for myself and training in awakening, as we call it, and also how to share this with other people, what we call responsibility. Yeah, and this the sense of really having something that is true and valuable valuable, and just wanting to share it with other people, trying to be able to share it with other people is one of the most meaningful experiences that I've had, and at this point in my life is perhaps the main intention directing where I'm going forward, is really having something that's true and useful and being able to offer it to people. And so with that, we'll move into the period of meditation practice. I'll be guiding a few different practices that sort of correspond to different points in my journey that I mentioned. The first practice will be what I think is the first practice that I learned. It's sort of like the classic meditation technique, feeling your breath, mindfulness of breathing, breath meditation, where we'll just pay attention to the body sensations of breathing. The second technique is called Just Feel. It's from the System of Unified Mindfulness that I learned at the UVM mindfulness program that I've been working a lot with over the past few years. And then the third technique we'll do is a bit of the interpersonal meditation that I mentioned before that we do some at the monastery. And all three of these techniques, all the guidance that I'm doing is optional. You can, if you have your own practice that you want to do, you can do that. If you just want to sit, that's fine. If at any point you feel like you need to use the bathroom or like get up, you feel free to take care of yourself. And again, everything that I'm leading is a choice. It's optional. So you can take a moment to find a comfortable way to sit for this practice. So we'll start by sitting for 25 minutes or so. There will be a 5-minute period for movement in the middle, then another 25-minute period of practice. If you'd like, you can start by just taking a few deeper breaths to help yourself relax, settle into your body. You can have your eyes closed or just soften your gaze. Now just notice the feeling of your breath in your body. Feeling your breath wherever you notice it. This could be the rise and fall of your abdomen and chest. You might feel it at your nostrils. You might feel it in your back. And so you can just gently rest your attention on these body sensations of your breath. And naturally, as your attention wanders away into thinking or other experiences, that's no problem. You can just gently bring it back to feeling your breath. If you'd like, you can even celebrate the fact that you notice your attention had moved. Give yourself some encouragement. Doing this can help make a wandering mind an opportunity to make meditation even more enjoyable. So each time you notice your attention wander away, bringing it back, feeling your breath. This practice, you don't need to try to make your breath any particular way, any deeper than it is, any quicker or slower. Just giving it complete permission to inhale, exhale, however it does naturally right now. Getting curious about what these sensations are actually like. Notice the details of where in your body the sensations are, how they move as your breath moves. You might notice them changing in intensity, beginning and ending. You can just notice the details of this experience. Alright, very good. Now if you'd like, you can continue just feeling your breath. Or if you'd like, I invite you to let your attention freely float throughout your body. So now the focus space will be any and all body sensations, physical and emotional. And so for this practice called Just Feel, we'll be noting any and all body sensations. And so the way to note a body sensation is notice where in your body your attention is drawn to a particular sensation, part of your body, or your whole body at once. And then, just as we were tending to the breath, letting your attention explore that body sensation. You can do that for a few seconds. And then, after spending a few seconds with that body sensation, you can either continue to stay with that, or notice another part of your body your attention's drawn to. And then spend a few seconds exploring what that part of your body feels like. And just repeating this process over and over again every few seconds, noticing and focusing on a body sensation is the practice of doing Just Feel, noting body sensations. So if you'd like, you can give this practice a try. The body sensations that you're noticing may feel somewhat pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. See if you can drop any pushing or pulling on your experience you might be aware of. If there's any intentional resistance to the body sensations you're aware of, you can release that. If there's any resistance that you're not able to release, then just don't add any resistance onto that. If you'd like, something you can try doing each time you notice a new body sensation is saying gently to yourself in your mind the word feel. This is a mental label that can accompany the body sensations that you're noting. Repeating the word feel each time you notice a body sensation can be a tool to help aid your focus. This is an option you can try if it seems like it would be helpful. once again, each time you notice that your attention is moved away from doing this practice, you can just gently bring it back, offering yourself some words of encouragement or congratulation if you'd like to. Again, whether your experience is somewhat pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, you can see if you can drop any intentional resistance towards the sensations in your body that you're aware of. And whatever resistance might still be there, you can get curious about that too. Every few seconds, noticing a body sensation, and then spending a few moments just really getting to know it. sometimes as you pay attention to your body sensation, experience changes somewhat. That's fine. You can just notice that change in the experience. Okay, very good. So now we'll have a period of 5 minutes where you're invited to move around in the space, go outside if you'd like, and you can experiment with keeping this practice going in motion. So we'll meet back up here in this room in 5 minutes for the next practice. continue with this practice or whatever practice you've been doing if you'd like. Or I invite you to try some interpersonal meditation. If you'd like, you can lift your eyes again and find a partner somewhere in the room and set up yourself so you're sitting facing each other. There's an odd number of people, some partners. Anybody else looking for a partner? So you can just drop into your body, let your gaze soften, your eyes close if you'd like. Just start by tuning into where you're at right now. Noticing any emotions that might be present, how your body feels now that you're sitting across from this person. And so the first exercise we'll be doing is sharing noticings. So we'll start by sharing things that we notice in our own experience. You can use the sentence stem, I'm noticing, and then something in your experience. So for example, this could be, I'm noticing the muscles in my feet tightening. I'm noticing a sense of my face feeling flush. Things like this. And so you can go popcorn style, or if you'd like, you can go back and forth between you and your partner. And we'll just start by sharing these noticings about our own experience.
I noticed the heaviness of the sweater that I'm wearing. Notice how warm it is in this room.
See your face with that mouth up.
I notice that my face and the muscles around my eyes in particular feel relaxed.
I noticed like an urge to try to calm
I notice my eyes feeling very moist.
Response.
I'm noticing that I am seeing
I notice the muscles of my face tightening.
Movements of perspective in this mindfulness.
I notice the weight of my body resting on this chair.
I notice the feeling. This stretch feels good.
I'm noticing
Feel like it collapses.
breath. I looked for it and I found it.
I notice how my spine stacks nice and straight up and supports my body.
Feeling good. Has a lot to
notice the gentle weight of my feet and lower legs on the floor.
Enjoy.
I notice my low back being supported by
Put it
these
on with free will.
I'm noticing the pressure of my fingers against your
I notice the warmth of my skin where my fingers are touching one another.
So all the body positions feel kind of
both the warm skin
everything is very
some coolness
curious.
in the air around it.
From the perspective that it is free.
I notice the very subtle coolness as I flies around my
What is it
hands.
saying?
noticing the
Breeze from the
sensation of my feet against the
Touches up
floor.
against my skin.
Like a light
That it feels good.
Someone
It should
feels
process going.
direction.
And never ends. The finality of that normal sensation
Flies reflecting.
I'd like to keep on.
Okay, very good. You can return to silence. If you'd like, you can drop your gaze again. The next layer we'll add to this is sharing noticings about the other person. And in doing this, it's important to only share noticings about things that are objective, things that are as just plainly descriptive of what's evident. So, for instance, a noticing you can share is, I noticed that, or I'm noticing that you're slightly rocking your body. So this is different than saying, I noticed that you feel antsy right now. Just keeping it to, as close as possible, the objective fact of what's happening. So now you can add this layer, and you can continue to share noticings about yourself, continuing with this practice.
I notice that I can't see your feet because of your skirt.
I'm noticing that when
I
you're
notice
position
your
is still
before.
a bit like an added
I notice that the lights in your glimmer off of your glasses tell
projected in there.
apart across the top.
You know, this make my glasses are about the same color.
I notice that your hair is curly.
I notice yours doesn't appear the same.
I'm noticing that you objectively existing.
I notice that we're both
I noticed that the fabric of your sweater was
I noticed that we both had on heavy sweaters.
Positioning.
We both had on that to wear tonight.
I noticed that your hands are resting on your lap.
And I noticed the other hands are helping sometimes.
I noticed that your it's not a person but
The object that we speak of objectively appears to be projections of subject.
I noticed that you
I was nursing thoughts coming up about like wanting to like
I'm noticing the lack of literal writing on your body.
like but
Where there might be
noticed that you were engaged in activity.
I noticed that you had lighter skin.
Somebody please.
Each notice one thing, and then noticing that this eye, actually that person would notice something, we could just keep
So just
noticing.
sit there for a bit more popcorn style. It's like tapping out. You can do whatever you want.
I noticed that your earrings are very
The whole nature of objectivity.
I noticed your shoulders rise.
That I worry about when you said slip out and wanted to leave.
I noticed an advanced piece of technology inside my life.
It's got spirit.
Maybe I wasn't clear what I said.
To the one I consider all over the map with technique.
I wanted to clarify what I said. She said, when you said, slip out. I was like, you felt uncomfortable saying you had some sort of aversion to doing this activity that you wanted to leave.
Yeah.
It's all about dialectic until there's a sense of absolute
I noticed a sort of like
which means
thoughts coming up to respond to this like as a normal conversation, and then like trying to like hide that within the world, and then like
United States of
I think
some people use techniques.
noticing just when
Alright. If you'd like, you can take a moment to thank your partner, as we will be switching partners before we add the next layer to this. So, find a new partner. And if you're continuing in solitary meditation practice during this, you can experiment with working the distractions of having other people doing this exercise in the room, folding them into your practice. Maybe turning towards the sound of people talking, maybe continually bringing your attention back when it goes away from some other meditation object. So again, you can take a moment to let your gaze drop or your eyes close, letting your body soften and sink into the chair and the floor a little bit more. You can continue sharing noticings about your experience, what you're noticing being with the other person. And now we'll add the layer of sharing imaginings. So this is any story or judgment that your mind puts on top of your experience of the other person. So an example of this would be, you could notice that a person's fingers are moving, their hands are playing with each other. You could say, I'm imagining you're feeling nervous. You could see that someone is smiling, and you could say, I'm imagining that you're feeling happy. And so this is a third tool in your toolbox you can use to share. Feel free to mix this in with noticings about yourself and about the other person. And you can, again, bring your attention back with your partner.
I noticed you just seat. So that you can think about
anxiety around staying in fun.
Well, I imagine you have been dealing with difficulty.
I notice you smiling and I'm
Notice what in my family are called ragi eyelids. Ragi is the name of one of our family lines. And it's the genetics that have heavy eyelids.
You have one too, I notice you have them.
And that reminds me at a deeper level how my mind works. Kind of free association that if I'm driving a Volvo, I notice all the other Volvos on the road. And birds of a feather flock together.
And I'm
In my
imagining
mind,
like,
it feels like, oh, it's nice that I'm not alone, others are like me. And I immediately also notice the vanity that goes with that, because some people, I don't notice other gods. Why am I noticing this? I know that there's sort of some selective perception that says, I like my Volvo. So somebody has it, I want to see it. I got one too. Or something like that.
People who drive my car too. I wish I bought it in a different color. I thought I'd see but then listening to you say what you just said, I noticed that you're sitting. Visually, things we recognize from
And yet I noticed one other thing that I'm so grateful for, that I have not ever seen really somebody who's not unique. And whether the whole scale of aesthetics or goodness, morality or aesthetics, you can't stop the uniqueness. It seems to interfere with it because of making categories and patterns and I'm extremely curious about the uniqueness of individuality.
That was the word I was thinking about. There's really no such thing as an ordinary person.
Yes.
Or, really, an ordinary living being.
It's the normative stuff. You try to find a norm.
Ordinary grains of sand.
Right. That creation is creative in every point.
So those words are very sure everything is so unique, it seems the same.
In the sense of oneness of purpose of being full of diversity without breaking unity. That's what creation appears to be. I'm going to say that what the function is.
So you can come into silence once again, and we'll add one final layer to this. If you'd like, now you can include sharing wantings. If you notice something come up for you that you have some desire for, this could be like, I want us to just be quiet, or I want to move my body more. You can now include sharing these wantings that come up. So, things you notice about yourself, notice things about the other person, things you're imagining about the other person, and things that you're wanting.
happiness I have not.
That's really practice. I work that way, I think. I think sometimes we call it. As I do that.
There wasn't
Rather than have
To a certain extent, if you don't have any pressure,
It's a lot of fun. Always having to seek the help.
I imagine you said nursing friends or
I'm really at the mood. I'm tired of always having to monitor and practice the technique and all that. I want to live this for lilies of the field. Is it possible?
As a beginning, I wouldn't know. But I do know that we practice
I imagine that would be an interesting experiment.
like lilies of the field. And we just
It's a testimony to the fact that you can't make it happen, even if you can stop it. If you give yourself to it, it has its fruit, it bears its fruit. But it's not your ego accomplishing it. It's just, it goes away when you ignore it.
not just
Well,
I can take quite a bit of effort.
in those cases, wherever it's physical pain, I'm all for paladin without side effects. However, you can get a paladin effect without heavy side effects. Or any addictive habits. That should compassionately apply all the psychological suffering. They're focusing on whatever is inspired as a and if you don't have that, you can't find that. You should be at least a little curious. For others,
And then it was through that I knew what other people's suffering, so it's compassion.
this is a great group. I love the confessions that they turn out to be. It seems in some ways a confession, but it's very confessional.
It's very, I think it's just mindfulness. We wrote other groups, other churches.
I don't imagine you're going through the process of unfolding for myself
With
or
some expectations
So again, coming to silence, and you can find some way to thank your partner if you'd like. And then we'll organize the chairs, move into the next portion of the evening. So now we have about 30 minutes or so for questions, answers, comments, thoughts, reflections. So it's open, all of you, whatever you've got.
I found the celebration of of bringing your attention back helpful, but I also noticed that there was a point when I would get distracted by the celebration, and I would get wrapped up and get confused about how to celebrate.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how if you found a tactful way to celebrate.
Yeah. 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 So I'm glad that it was helpful for you somewhat, and I can relate to the experience of sort of having like a part of a meditation technique or a little add-on that's supposed to help with distractions or help with something end up sort of becoming a distraction itself. For me, when I do this, sometimes if it's just something just really short and sweet, just like fantastic, or I don't remember exactly why I did this, but I remember at some point I was just I would visualize a piece of cake when this would happen. Maybe it's a celebration thing, or just sort of oh, that's how sweet it's gonna be, coming back to feeling my body or something. Another thing that you can do is something that I do more, that's an option, is remembering your intention, just saying it to yourself again if you set a clear intention while you're practicing. One for me is I do this so I can experience peace and share it with others, and that helps me come back. So maybe if you have just a thing that you know is I'm always just gonna say this, and it's short and sweet, that might help. Yeah. I think Michael's, yours went up first. It was beautiful. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. One way or another. Yeah, I'm sort of, thinking about your talk earlier, and it's just sort of this, kind of curiosity to me that comes of the question of how one would use this sort of, I guess, process of preparation for other types of life activities. I think that you're sort of alluding to the potential for in what you're doing as a resident. And I don't in any way not believe that that's true, but it's an interesting, I feel sort of maybe too immersed in that potentiality to recognize what the alternative is, or I don't know exactly how to put it. I'm just trying to think. I grew up in a community, and I struggle a lot to translate my experiences of that process, of those sorts of philosophies, really of the things that I experience here as well, to a lot of everyday situations. And I don't find it personally to be simple at all to really implement that sort of thing, and I don't think anyone here claims that it is. But you know, it's just sort of an interesting question in my mind. So then, like, when you're in that position, you know, or when any resident here is in that position, then what next? I mean, there's a sort of corruptingness to seeing reality in a new light and questioning things and pulling out from some habitual ways of doing things into something that at least is intended to facilitate strong practice, and then sort of changing into other situations where strong practice is absolutely equally necessary to really experience them in a realistic way, or to push one's sort of personal boundaries and limitations. And then the expectation of a lot of those situations is that we have little lightweight community to sort of support us and help us through those processes of the really, really hard stuff. So it's just sort of a question that's sort of bubbling up to me, like, ultimately, what do we do with all this stuff when we're in some of the kinds of positions that you described that led you to where you are now?
What are the stuff being what we get from the practices that we do?
From the practices, from the philosophy, from
Yeah.
the community, from the whole, you know, the whole devotion.
How do we bring that stuff into the situations when they actually come up?
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious on a sort of superficial level, like how you would bring some of the things into situations as they come up, but I'm just sort of acknowledging the extremely challenging nature, from, in my experience, to really sort of apply things and take them to the next level. And, like, I guess my experience is at the level of alienation in that process where, you know, I've come from an environment with one set of expectations, and I think a very imperfect environment, into another very imperfect environment with another kind of set of expectations, and not then even really identifying with the surrounding culture. And I imagine that you know, this is part of the process of creating that experience for people who don't have that experience in the same way, of a sort of deconstruction of a sort of maybe more conventional lifestyle. So, but then, you know, it's not, the Monastic Academy as a process is not intended towards a permanent style of existence for most people who come through. The place I came from was more intended for that, but then people would try that and hit certain limitations of where that would bring them.
So the question is about how doing things like intensive training for a while as preparation, how that works, how one could do that.
Or just even like what you would do afterwards. Like what do you do, you know, what do you do when you leave?
So the main way that we talk about this at Maple is we are training to be trustworthy leaders. We're training in awakening and responsibility, mindfulness, and leadership. And the way that I understand that is we're doing these mindfulness practices to see what's happening really clearly and relate to it in a skillful way. As Soryu said in his most recent talk here during the practice, that he was guiding, asking the question, what's happening and is it worth it? So having a sense of wisdom of what's happening and how to relate to it, And then also the skills of leadership, of being able to inspire other people to act in those wise and loving ways that come from your own understanding, towards the goal of ending human greed and preserving life on Earth. That's like sort of the Maple mission as I understand it today. And so the specific things that a person might do after leaving, I think would be like anything related towards that goal in one way or another. A couple examples that come up fairly regularly during meetings at the monastery is a former resident, Toby, who started a startup and a meditation app called Bright Mind. Another one being Miles Bouquet, who started his own nonprofit, an organization called Dharma Gates, which brings opportunities to explore intensive practice to college students. So that's sort of the like official, typical like Maple response about that. Things, people taking on positions of leadership, moving towards things that help preserve life on Earth. I'm imagining you might want to hear something more personal or something from me. So let's see if something comes to me right now. For me, I think it's, like I said, right now the main intention guiding me in my life is deeply finding peace for myself and doing whatever I can to spread it and offer it to other people. And to a large part, like I don't know the specifics right now. It's sort of like I hope to just keep paying attention and seeing what is needed, what's, you know, what there is to be done, what the next step is. Does that respond to your question?
I think it does. I would just add one last thing in my thought here. That would be like, I think it would be, again, potentially sort of, you know, what you would get aside from the immediate experience is a certain amount of linkage with other people with common goals that would sort of go over time with that. But I also think it's still, I think it's also possibly the limitation of some of these sorts of attempts at spiritual experiments. Like, I think the limitation of the attempt that I was at is people felt like, well, you could create spiritual community and do all these things within it. But then for those of us who were children of that environment, we also wanted to bring things to new places in other ways, to become more educated than our parents were, really, to become more, you know, some of these things like leadership qualities and other kinds of things than I think a lot of people who we were raised by came with, because they were taking one step from there and we wanted to take it a step further. And different ones of us has had very different experiences with that kind of thing, but there's certainly potentially a sense of like, oh my God, these are great ideas, and now I'm in the world trying to do this stuff, and it's like totally hell, because, you know, I want to help, you know, people awaken in their experience, and they don't necessarily wish to do it, and furthermore, they don't necessarily wish me to do it either. And so it's, and all the things of expecting a trustworthy leadership, a lot of that's not always wanted. You know, it's not like if you go and work in like a business or something, being trustworthy is something that you really have to work very hard to be accepted for in a lot of environments, never mind just even tolerated. And so this is it's just a reality that I think is a harder thing, and I still wonder, like, sort of in the long term, what meta community exists to support that level of application, because otherwise you're just sort of flapping in the breeze a little bit, so kind of commentary more than a question, but
Jason, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to have interaction with our other friends here. I found it meaningful and rewarding, and enjoyed some laughter too. So thank you very much for that.
You have another? Well, I was hearing Michael, and just the thing that I was hearing from what you were saying, and that kind of prompted a question in me. Not a question, but I don't know, maybe a clarification but about the challenge of leaving a container and continuing to do the work without the container holding you once you go off and out. And I don't know if that's the question you were asking, of how to leave the container and continue it out beyond that, because maybe I'm just feeling personally reflective of how hard that's been for me in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't think necessarily it's a question I have for you, but I'm welcome to hear your thoughts on it, because you are still in the container. So, but I feel like a lot of people can relate to that experience of being in some place that they're held, and then leaving it and going out and trying to continue on with those same principles or that same kind of way of living. And it just maybe I've just kind of personally felt crushed before, coming out into the real world feels really harsh. So I don't know if that's what you were saying, but that's what it brought up for me.
it's a good part of what I was saying.
Yeah.
So
And so I just really needed to say that. So thank you. But if you had any response, I'd welcome it.
Yeah, I'm mostly just still in the container.
Yeah.
I hope I don't get crushed.
This is your warning.
You can learn a lot from getting crushed as long as you approach it the right way.
Jesse?
Yeah, while you're kind of response to the whole evening, I've always been impressed by who you are. And a lot of talk has gone by tonight about doing. What do you do? What choices do you make about what you do? Either before you enter the monastery or after you leave, or, interaction with the community. But who you are is, I think, really important. It's like I recognized from when I first met you that you have a presence that would not surprise me that you would be at the monastery. It's just a something, a consciousness, a presence in your being. And that then develops. And then who you are goes out into the world, as opposed to what you do. I remember meeting someone regularly at a cooperative food store, and at some point I said, "Tell me, what is your secret?" And she alluded to the meditation. And I said, "Oh, Okay, that makes sense. And whether you, that is who you are and this presence that I'm talking about, the quality of your being, whether that comes before the meditation or after, or whether it's simply developed by the meditation, you know, it's like maybe all of us come here. And that's what I learned from the interacting part, you know, that maybe we all have this sense of, there was, you'll forgive the community kind of joke about Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. You know, because we come to this as the lost boys, you know. And are we lost or are we found? Have we found something and we don't know where to put it? Is it are we lost boys or is it we're lost in a world that doesn't get what we found, you know?
Thank you.
I don't know if you had a question earlier.
Oh, I just had a comment about, you mentioned, I think during your talk you mentioned something about Soyuz saying, is it worth it? You know, what's happening and is it worth it? And so I decided to trust that it was worth it tonight. And I had a brilliant meditation, even though I didn't participate in the interaction, and I chose not to specifically because I had a very emotionally intense week. I kind of thought, I don't want to talk, I don't want to listen. And what it really was is I didn't want to think. And I tried to make them, it got very noisy in here, and I thought this is going to be just like birds singing outside. It's no more than that. It's just here. And I didn't focus on anybody's voice or what they were saying. It was just, and I didn't, at just some point, just I could feel myself smiling. It was a wonderful meditation. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Even just hearing you share that, I see the thing happening of like you found some peace and just you expressing it, like my body